Are we good to
Yes,
go?
take it away,
Oh,
Krista.
thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that introduction. And Sarah, I'll go ahead and get started with this sandbox discussion. I was telling Jennifer I was quite nervous about committing to this talk because I had no idea what I was going to share, but I actually think it could be quite interesting. And I'll talk for a little bit and then we'll have a conversation. And I'm really actually excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation. I want to emphasize this sandbox, right? And really thank Jennifer and Sarah for creating this truly collegial, safe space to, just kind of throw some ideas around. I'm genuinely interested in what you might find interesting about this study. So I want to express that gratitude, and I also want to thank Matt Lynch. He can't stay today, but I know he's here right now, so Matt, you can wave. Matt was a huge supporter of the Teaching Climate Change study when I was working with the Office of Sustainability. Matt is the director, and I was his curriculum faculty counterpart. My position with the Office of Sustainability was abruptly defunded around Christmas Eve. And so I've been kind of scrambling with a full-time teaching load this semester and had to put the study on the back burner. So thank you so much, Matt. And Matt also invited our Vista crew today. So I want to thank you guys for listening in. I also want to acknowledge Julian Canary, who I think I saw in a little square here. Julian has a wonderful project called Green Teaching Opportunity, the GTO, and she's posting some amazing things about education, lobbying, and sustainability certifications. It was Julian's work with the World Wildlife Federation. She did a big nationwide assessment across higher education of environmental education. And that study gave US colleges a C minus. And that was in the 90s. And that study was supposed to be replicated, but never was. That is actually the work that made me wonder, how do we know what our students know about what's happening with the climate? You know, so Julian is a brilliant researcher and she gives wonderful questions and feedback. She's a careful reader of my blog. So thank you, Julian, for being here today. Most of you are familiar with the Worry and Hope focus group study that Sarah mentioned. This finally got published in March. Matt Lynch and I did an extensive set of focus groups with students, and this study talks about fear, anger, sadness, shame, and hope in the student experience, and that's how I got connected with this existential toolkit group. I'm not going to be talking about this study today, but as part of this study, we did do about 6 focus groups with groups of faculty. And it was in those groups that a professor of history said this. She said, "I'm depressed most of the time. Well, all of the time. I've spent 25 years being objective, not pushing my viewpoint. I'm finding it hard because I want to push my viewpoint. It's too important to be posturing in my academic balance when the planet is dying." And when she made that comment, when this person made that comment, I was like, wow, there is something we need to understand here. What is it that our faculty are bringing into the classroom? Because this is where the experience of higher education really happens, right? Is in that professor-student interaction. And we don't always know what it is they're bringing, both in the curriculum and in the invisible curriculum, in their attitudes, right? So that's when I realized the need for a follow-up study, and I created the Teaching Climate Change study. It's a formal IRB approved study. I actually expanded it to 100 interviews is the target, and to include guest interviews from outside the UH system. So I've been talking to people mostly in our system, but also outside. It's all set up right now in MaxQDA 20. MaxQDA is a qualitative coding software. So if any of you are experts in the new MaxQDA 20 features, you know, I'm curious what this software can do in terms of, you know, cross-referencing, and it's pretty cool software. I've completed 35 interviews. So it's, you know, over 40 hours of recordings and 350 pages of transcription, all of which I've done myself. So I've really deeply listened to all of these interviews. And the question is, what do faculty know, think, feel, and do about climate change? So Sarah mentioned some of my recent setbacks. And so just 2 weeks ago, so my plan B was to apply for sabbatical next year, for which I'm eligible. And my sabbatical request was denied. And I received this memo from the chancellor a couple weeks ago where she says, "What is the need for this? Were there any findings in these 30 interviews that lead to the need to pursue this research further?" So, you know, so my question to this group is an authentic question. Is this interesting? What can we do with this? Is this important? What can we make from these interviews? And then one last thing I want to bring in is the Scholars Warning Initiative. This was a letter that came out in December. I signed the letter, and it was shortly after that my position at the Office of Sustainability was defunded. Coincidence? Probably. Am I paranoid? Probably. But I did have some weird email exchanges with a couple of colleagues who declined to sign the Scholars Warning letter. And I reviewed the list, and nobody in this group signed the letter. Susie Moser is signatory to the letter. And I think it's relevant to this group because the Scholars Warning Initiative is talking about the need to be honest about what's happening with the climate and about the possibilities, the real possibilities of near-term social collapse and extinction. How do we talk about that, right? So after the Scholars Warning thing, then Michael Mann published his book, and there's this doomism, hopeism thing going on. So I'm gonna come back to that later, but I think it's something relevant to this group. So today's discussion, I'm just going to talk for a little bit, show you some sandbox data, and then really ask you authentically, what's interesting? What purpose is there in this? What products could come out of it? How could this support the type of affective pedagogies that we talk about in this group? Just a couple of random thoughts. You might be expecting me to share with you a pie chart similar to the Worry and Hope study about emotions that faculty are bringing to this work, but that's not what I'll be sharing. In fact, the tenor of these conversations they're very intense and thoughtful and deep, but they're not emotional. So I kind of found that the group setting of the student focus groups led to a really emotional quality, and these one-on-one interviews don't really have that quality. So it's not actually what came up. I had learned in graduate school about transparent field noting as a part of a research methodology. And so I started the blog, which is part of the research. So it's not that I haven't analyzed the data. I have analyzed it as reflective field notes. I've gone very deep into each interview as its own case study, an N of one, if you will, this individual person and their experience in translating the complex information about climate change that we all work with, right? So what I haven't done is connect the 35 interviews that I've done, right? Or it could become an N of 100 faculty across from an international community. And Julian Canary pointed out to me that there are 1.5 million faculty in the United States alone. That includes full-time faculty and adjunct part-timers. what percentage of those faculty are deeply and actively engaging with climate change the way this community is? 1%, 5%, 50%, right? Do we know? How do we know what faculty know and what they're bringing about climate change? So the blog itself has been, I think, a really valuable project. It's increased the confidence and efficacy of the interview subjects themselves, you know, having the complexity of their task mirrored back to them, and you know, the love and appreciation that I feel for what they're going through, to show that to them has been a gift. I've made so many connections across and among the group, and really seek to elevate the work of my faculty colleagues, because these are the experts that we really, really need at this time in this work. So my latest blog post that I just published last week was with Panu. And I will share with you that link at the end of today's talk. It's a wonderful interview with an amazing scholar. And Panu mentioned that he's done some experimenting with very short-term interventions with faculty, you know, workshops and so forth. And he says in this post that, you know, it doesn't take much. Faculty will begin to engage with this climate anxiety, eco grief, will begin to engage with it with just a very small intervention. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'll share that link with you later. I think Panu couldn't be here today. It's some holiday in Finland that involves sparkling wine, I think. So he's doing Finnish things right now. I thought of a whole bunch more questions as I was preparing this presentation. I won't read them all. Lots of who, what, where, why, and how. I think it's really interesting work, so I'm excited to share it with you. Let me tell you about the study. I loved Renee Lertzman's book, Environmental Melancholia. It's a description of her shortitudinal study of environmental grief, solastalgia. And she talks about using a SQUIN, a single question aimed at inducing narrative. I start with faculty, having them talk about themselves as a teacher, their love of teaching, right? How'd you get into this gig? So we don't start out talking about climate change, but about that teacherly identity. And then the questions are designed to rotate among that teacher identity, which is so significant, a personal identity, sometimes being a parent or being community engaged, how they manage their home, and then the disciplinary identity. What has the climate crisis brought to what it means to be a psychologist or an economist or a scientist or an artist, you know, or an English professor in my case? I feel that the climate situation is impacting all of these identities across the curriculum. And I really maintain that this is everybody's job. For too long, we have left education about the environment and about climate change to environmental studies faculty, right? Like Sarah. And they've been shouldering this for 20 years. They've been teaching this stuff, and everybody else says, oh, it's, you know, it's not my discipline. Well, it's now everybody's discipline. So I really focus on this across the curriculum approach. Here's who I've interviewed so far. A pretty nice spread across the disciplines. A pretty nice balance between 2-year faculty, we have 8 community colleges, and 4-year faculty, we have 2 4-year campuses that I've done interviews at. So about half the faculty teach mainly 1st and 2nd year courses, and about half of the interviews are with folks teaching upper division and graduate level courses. And I put that little sandbox icon here to remind you that, you know, this is just a first pass at some coding and some numbers, and, you know, I just made some charts so that we could look at what's here. This is not final data. This is just a first look. The interview subjects almost all have PhDs, even if teaching at a community college where they don't technically need a PhD, almost all of them are post-tenure. And one thing that came up that is interesting is that faculty identity is not just determined by the PhD, right? They bring layers. As an example, I interviewed a faculty member who has a PhD in anthropology, so he's in the social sciences department, but his master's is in environmental science, and his bachelor's degree was in biology. You know, so faculty teach through these layers of their training, not just that PhD layer. Rather than organizing them by rank, I organize them by generation. I think it's a quite interesting situation with, we still have about 4 generations. There are still some traditionalists, that generation hanging on somewhere. You know, we have many generations in the faculty right now. I'm in the Gen X, so that's kind of the folks who are in the peak years of their career, if you will. I interviewed some boomers and some millennials. I think this is relevant because for boomers and Xers, there's kind of this aha moment, or I sometimes call it the oh shit moment, where we kind of came to realize what's happening with the climate, with the planet. Whereas for millennials and below, it's always been there. They learned about it in junior high, and it's more about bringing it out of the background and into the foreground. So I think there's an interesting dynamic here. And then Generation Z is who our current students are, and they'll be potentially joining the faculty in the next 5 years or so. Diversity, a little bit skewed towards male. I don't know why, but it tries to balance out male and female. And a little bit skewed towards whiteness, which is a problem, and I think is a mix of 3 things. One, of course, researcher bias. Perhaps I know a lot of the Caucasian faculty, although I've made a real effort to diversify the interviews that I've done. I use a snowball sampling. So I started with people I knew, people who are very visible and outspoken about climate change. And then I asked them, hey, who else is engaging with this? Who else should I talk to? So it could also be that Caucasian faculty are the ones maybe more out there, more visible as climate educators. And it's a bias in the faculty demographic of the UH system, which you see there's skewed white, which is a problem. So we have talked a lot about we need more diversification among the faculty and among the faculty engaging with climate change and climate justice issues. Okay, I'm gonna pause after this slide and see if you guys have any questions so far. But here's kind of where it starts getting a little interesting. Again, this is very loose data. These are mentions, not individuals. So those numbers are just times it's been mentioned. But about half of the people have talked about guilt and dissonance, particularly around driving and flying. So they'll say things like, oh, I know I shouldn't drive so much, but I have to because, or I try to limit my flying, but. So one thing climate change has introduced to faculty identity is guilt. They talk mentions of reducing consumerism. I called this frugality, not buying clothes or not buying microfibers, reusable utensils, that kind of thing. Solar panels on their house, food choices, being vegan, eating less meat, things like that. Nature activities, restoration activities, working in the lo'i, in the taro patch here in Hawaii, doing coastal restorations, things like that. And then some preppers, folks who are growing food. One person had actually moved to an off-grid homestead situation and hurricane preparedness, that kind of thing. And one mention so far of voting. So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any question or comment so far. Or if you have a question and want to put it in the chat, maybe Sarah can help, or I'll just keep going.
I'm going to refer to a question that's in the chat, if that's okay. And folks, I'm trying to see if there's some way I can do. Can you stop the screen share, and then maybe we can see people a little bit better?
Yeah, but can I not? Because then
no,
I'll
that's okay. Okay, never mind then.
open
Okay,
it back up and
no problem. So Dan's saying this new book project from Brian Alexander seems very relevant to your research, and he links it. I understand that he's also relying heavily on interviews with educators as well as administrators and folks in other roles in higher ed. That's not a question, sorry.
Awesome. I love Brian. Brian was a speaker at one of our recent virtual retreats. He's an amazing futurist and philosopher. So thank you. I'll check that out for sure.
Good to see you, Dan. Other comments? Just jump in. I can't see anybody, so just jump in.
I know.
These are all individual level actions. No mention of collective action, question mark, Krista.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
Along those lines, one of my colleagues at Oberlin, Janet Fiskio, has written a great essay in a book called Teaching Climate Change in the Environmental Humanities or something like that. Oh, it's that book. And she describes how on day one, she asks her students what actions they can take to deal with these feelings and of despair and urgency. And they all report individual actions. And she uses that as our sort of launching point to say, isn't it interesting that we don't have an imagination and students don't have an imagination for anything other than that. And that's part of the work we have to do for sure. Yeah.
That's a great insight. And that's really what I'm looking for today is how to look at that. I do hear in the interviews, faculty mostly talking about individual actions and mostly sharing with students, well, what can we do? Comes back to those individual actions most of the time in what they've been describing, but that's a great point. I just have a couple more data slides, but they start getting a little more interesting here. This is a really rich portion of the interviews when I'm curious about why some faculty teach climate change, engage deeply, are passionate, can't sleep at night because of it, redesign their courses around it, as I have done, and others don't. Why is that? So I ask about sort of the awakening to the climate crisis, and these are the sources of climate epiphany, if you will. Lots of books and films. Al Gore comes up a few times. National Geographic, the Shattered Earth holograph cover. Personal mentors, personal role models. Panu has talked about that in his work. An aha moment. Sometimes this happens in nature. One person wrote or told me, I was 7 and I realized we're on a giant orb floating in space. And, these are kind of spiritual moments of like, whoa, that was a really interesting moment. So I think those are quite interesting. A few people shared with me that professional development workshops, some of them that I had organized, and they said, I wasn't thinking about this until you brought me to that workshop. And I started teaching about climate change in 2017 after attending the XYZ workshop. So those do work. Some of the subjects had done significant early career work and internships. For example, one person was an intern in Washington, D.C. during negotiations around the Kyoto Protocol. So they bring interesting experiences. They talk about historical moments like the Kyoto Protocol or Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Iniki, climate events and historical moments. Some came in through activism experiences. Interesting mentions of personal trauma unrelated to the climate crisis, divorce, death, diagnosis, so forth, and how that personal trauma opens us up in that way. And a couple people mentioned their undergraduate experience. Okay, now this is the real sandbox here. I was just messing around with some ideas. I'm going to show you this, explain it, and then we'll come back to it, okay? So I told you I was interested in this doomism, hopeism thing. What can we learn about our faculty bringing a hope, or are they bringing a doom perspective or a post-doom perspective? So I was curious about that. And then in April, this guy, Sander Clement, posted this on the Deep Adaptation Forum. It's not a scholarly instrument, it's not a tested instrument or anything, but it spoke to a curiosity that I had. So I used Sander Clement's scale. It's a bit small, but it's got different frameworks. So you get a score from 1 to 10, basically denial, we got this, or what I call techno-optimism, doom, and then post-doom. And he looks at how you look at science, how you look at government, how you look at the causes of climate change, and the role of the free market. So I took an entirely subjective scoring, having listened to these interviews very deeply. I started giving them a score on this scale, just to kind of see what our faculty bringing. And so this is a scatter plot. The bigger the dot, the more faculty I put into that category. So you see that there's a wide range of perspectives, doom and hope, coming into the classroom, from the story passionists who are about telling new stories of solutions, to the it's too late, that's the doom perspective, and then the post-doom perspective Sander Clement called mentally adjusted. This is where you accept the possibility of near-term social collapse, and then something happens after that. I want to stop the screen share to be able to talk. So hold this in your mind. The last thing I wanted to share was some key quotations from the study, so that I could just sort of bring that faculty voice in. So I think I'd like to read just the first 3 out loud, because I think it's worth slowing down and really acknowledging that these are people, these are our colleagues, and this is what their experience is, right? So Sarah, could I ask you to read the first one and then tag someone to read the second one, who will tag someone to read the third one, and then the rest will just read silently, and then I'll stop the screen share and we'll talk, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
I like this. Okay. Humans have been affecting the environment for a long time, and it's hard to know if we've crossed some threshold or not, where things will speed up and ecosystems will break down quickly as a result. We talk about doomsday prophecies that don't come true, like Paul Ehrlich's population bomb and so forth. Humans have a lot of ingenuity, and so far we've been able to sidestep these Malthusian traps. There's nothing to suggest that their generation is going to be the one that's going to experience the big collapse, if there's going to be one. Life is far from perfect, and there's a lot of problems, but at the same time, you know, planet hasn't collapsed. So, and I will kick this over to Christy Manning.
Of course, it's not too late. It's going to be harder, but you know, if your boat is springing a leak, you don't debate about whether to plug the hole. If it's too late, it's already got water in it. So, well, there's worse things that can happen, right? How about Paul?
I've always been interested in the earth. It's very emotional to me, crying. It means a lot to me. I don't like what people do to each other, because if you treat the earth bad, you generally treat each other bad. If I can make a small change and help people, then they can go out and help someone. And it just goes on and on.
You know, I think it's worth really hearing these. So Paul, would you choose someone for the next one? It's worth the time.
Sure, let's go to Heather Price.
Okay.
A watershed moment for me was Al Gore's first movie. Anybody who saw the movie will never forget him going up in this lift, a mechanical lift, to get to where CO2 is today. And it just keeps going up and up and up and up. And he has to climb on this mechanical lift. It's very dramatic. He has to go up on this lift and show that carbon dioxide is at 350 ppm at that point. I'm going to segue. We reached 420 a few weeks ago. Anyhow, back to the quote. I was watching him teach this thing that I teach every day and thinking, how brave is this guy? He's a politician and he's teaching the science that I am extremely familiar with. And how much of a wimp am I for not getting out there like he is? Wimp is not the right word. Why am I hiding? Why am I afraid of this? His courage gave me courage to deeply investigate the reality of the emergency. And I did. It's at this point, I stopped being a passive messenger and became proactive agent of change. It was a turning point in my career. And this is from a professor of geography. And let's see, who next? Mike Gillespie.
I was kind of worried about it and thought everybody should know about it, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was my responsibility to teach people about it. And then about 2 years ago, I was like, well, I don't think anybody else is, so well, let me put this in there. Even if it is 20 minutes, everybody should know it's carbon dioxide. It's what fossil fuels are. This is what's happening. These are the issues, at least the basic climate change 101. Let's see. How about Jean?
So I don't have a geologist's understanding of climate change, but just sort of the surface level conventional wisdom around climate change, like, oh, the sea levels are rising. Oh, first it was called global warming. Now we call it climate change. But the warming has to do with why the beach feels like a bathtub, these kinds of things, just kind of popular knowledge around it, not knowing the difference between what's rumor and what's not, because I haven't taken that much time to engage in it at that level.
I think there's two more, Jean.
Okay, let me call on Paul.
Oh, I'm back. I'm 99% positive that I went my entire undergraduate career without ever hearing about climate change or anything related in any of the classes I was taking. I graduated in 2003. I was a poli-sci and econ double major and took business classes. In none of that or any of my gen ed did climate change ever come up. Economics professor, not too surprising. Let's go to Julian.
This is the last one, Julian.
It's so great to see everybody. I know my friends don't want to talk to me either. People make jokes about me. They're like, every time I talk to you, this is all you bring up. And I'm like, I thought we were talking about our students' futures. I thought we were preparing them for the future. Why are we having this conversation about SLOS, student learning outcomes? Why aren't we talking about water?
Thank you, everybody. We have 20 minutes left. Sarah, what would you like to do? Breakout rooms or open it up? What do you think?
I'm a fan of opening it up, but if people want breakout rooms, maybe do something with your responses, reaction. Thumbs up for breakout rooms. Okay, I think we just open up here. I think we've got one response. I'm going with Paul. How does that sound to everybody? Is that okay? Okay, we got thumbs up, lots of thumbs up, Krista. So I'm feeling the vibe.
Open it up. All right.
Open it up.
All right. We're opening it up. Questions? If you want to put any thoughts in the chat, Sarah can monitor that, and I'll look for your physical hand or your Zoom hand. And I see Heidi and then Michael.
Hi, can you hear me? Yep. Okay. I'm Heidi. I'm from Austria, and I have been interested in the topic ever since I can think. I grew up on an organic farm in Austria in the Alps, and so that has always been part of probably what my father taught me. In the course of of my lifetime, I have quite often been confronted with the apocalypse, like fundamental Christians and how they would talk, say, well, we knew this was coming because it's written in the Bible, it's the apocalypse. So this is something I wanted to ask you. How do you talk to people when they come with this kind of argument, and how do you differentiate between current climate science and talk like it's written in the Bible? Why are you surprised? I would like to have a small debate or discussion on this, because I sometimes have a hard time drawing the line between the two.
That's a big topic, Heidi. I did reach out to a professor of religion because I was curious about that very thing. Like, how does this come up in religion classes? And the first person I reached out to declined the interview and passed it to another faculty member who also really didn't go into that. There's this objective viewpoint. We try not to really engage with religion in the classroom. So in the discipline of religion, even, they try not to engage with personal religion in the classroom. It's really complicated. And she talked more about nature religions and sort of eco religion, Taoism, and other nature-oriented spiritualities. So that has not come up in this particular data set, and might be something faculty wouldn't share in an interview. I don't know. Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you. Michael.
I think someone else has a question.
Oh, sorry. Oh yeah,
Right?
Sarah is making a note about Catherine Hayhoe. And Andrea, do you want to add something about this? That's fascinating. Andrea, you work at a Catholic university. How does this work there?
Yeah, I think that was me. Yeah, I work at Universidad Católica here in Santiago, Chile. And after Laudato Si, the Pope's the current Pope's first letter, and it's on environment, and he also visited Chile like a year and a half after the letter, and the university took this great commitment to really do something about sustainability. So now we have an Institute of Sustainability. We are working on a project for every student coming in after, I think, next year would have to pass a class on sustainability. And then the other thing is that we are going carbon neutral from here to 2038. So the conversation about sustainability and climate change is really, really strong. And there are tons of things that the whole university is doing right now in terms of sustainability. I personally work in environmental humanities. I'm an English teacher here. And I think we're still like the last ones, like the humanities are sort of like the last ones getting on this track. Like there's still this idea that it's the science and biology sort of like oriented people that will save us. But especially that sustainability class, which has had like 3 years already, 2.5 years of like a pilot. The students need to engage in, I was reading before, in community projects that are really realistic. So the whole team engages in in finding municipalities or lower income areas that are climate change threatened, vulnerable. We as a country, we comply like with 9 of the 10 vulnerability scale indicators. And the students need to engage in a project. That's their final semester project. And it's interdisciplinary and intergenerational. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. And I see a lot of great resources and books on this coming up in the chat. One thing that comes to my mind is that, sometimes student will be in a class and one thing is being said and they might not talk about their family's belief that, this biblical apocalypse is in fact coming. So those things could kind of backfire and reinforce this personal viewpoint. Yeah, it's a fascinating issue, but I don't want us to run out of time. So Michael, what did you want to bring in? And then I see Paul Berger has his hand up after you, Michael.
Early on, you mentioned your own shift toward across the curriculum approaches. And we've had a project in the Pacific Northwest that kind of emphasized that for a number of years. But I'd be interested to know, have you run into a general acceptance of that among faculty, or people moving in that direction? And also, how does that play out against what I read in the newspaper, which seems to be an emphasis on technology and entrepreneurship and getting job ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I think this is a really serious thing in our colleges right now, is this job readiness. At our institution, they're cutting programs based on, oh, there's not jobs for that area, but we all know that we're training students for jobs that don't exist. And we need to be looking at what we're going to need students to know. What did I want to say? Oh, about across the curriculum. So our campus was designated as an AASHE Center for Sustainability across the curriculum, and this is kind of the AASHE model. We created a mechanism to add a designation to your class, a sustainability designation. If you take 4 of those designated courses while getting your gen eds, you get a minor equivalent in sustainability. That was sort of the best container we could make to incentivize it. And so we probably have 400 sustainability focused courses across our system. I do feel, however, that it's reached a saturation, like the faculty who are going to do it are doing it, and those who aren't. And so what percentage is that? One thing that's coming up in early summer is our president has said it's time to overhaul our general education programs. So this whole idea of a designation, like we could just scrap it if we had really brought our general education up to currency and relevancy. If faculty are paying attention in their disciplines, that disciplinary identity, if they're bringing that, then it would be in there. So if we could know that everybody from the disciplines was bringing it, then we wouldn't need to have a sustainability requirement or a designation or a course. It would just be there. So that marker was always meant to just benchmark our progress in basically updating the curriculum to address what is most relevant. I would like to go to, I think I said Paul, and then I see Claude.
Thanks, Krista. I'm really interested in this research, and also you talked about near-term societal collapse and mentioned extinction and the whole doomism debate. I just finished Michael Mann's book after reading Andreas Malm's books about how to blow up a pipeline, and I'm, Michael Mann criticizes some of my heroes like David Wallace Wells, and my own experience with people is that they don't actually know much about climate change. So I'm not that worried about people thinking that we're doomed, because most of them just don't even know that it's that urgent, of my students and the students we see. I wonder if you could just say more about that in terms of how, what you're thinking about that whole argument or debate, or when you say near-term collapse, that sounds like, you'd be somebody Michael Mann would criticize, like, well, why would you say that? What do you think of that whole kind of debate?
Yeah, is Sarah Bowie still here? Sarah convenes something called a Council for the Uncertain Future. And basically what Sarah is bringing, that's where I'm at. Sarah, would you like to talk about this conversation at Clark and elsewhere?
Sure. There's a lot to say about it, actually, isn't it? We started years ago, actually, raising the question of what's taking place, why is it happening, what are the implications, and then how do we choose to conduct ourselves, and given what we know, how do we live now? And we started that with a national group, and I can say a lot more about that. But we quickly were asked by the faculty at Clark University, where I've been for 40 years, to begin to have those conversations among ourselves. I've been feeling that as we've been talking today, how critical it is for people to have a more sustained conversation between each other, in which you do a deep dive and a kind of a reckoning on the front end. That allows for an institution to start to evolve and change. That allows for people to have company in reckoning together with what we're really facing. And so that has led at Clark to a program called A New Earth Conversation, which a number of faculty participate in. There may be 30 at this point across the disciplines. And we begin the student experience with the Council on the Uncertain Human Future, which again, in groups, allows students and faculty together to actually look at the societal context in which we meet, the space of this economy, this politics, this racial and social injustice context, which is actually the underpinning of our situation around the earth, our separation, our objectification, our use of the planet as a resource. So we go way back together and then build a learning context, which we called a collaborative, out of that. So I'm happy to talk. I don't want to take too much time. I'd be happy to talk with anyone more about any of this, or do another session like this about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for that great question. Yeah, I see Jean is in the square next to you, and when I saw Jean as Sarah was talking, Jean, you've been part of this existential toolkit group, and you've also, developed the curriculum for the bioregion, and sort of the other perspective is this, like, no, we're actually doing it. We have to be sure students know policies that are changing, laws that are changing. It really is happening. I tend more on the post-doom side of things, the type of deep dialogue Sarah's talking about. But when I talk with Eugene, I feel like, dang, Washington State's doing it. Let's do it. So do you want to add anything to kind of represent that? Like, how do you legitimately teach hopeism that isn't shallow or false?
Well, it's a really tough question. And we, like you, Krista, were doing sustainability across the curriculum workshops for years and years, involving literally hundreds of faculty in Washington and kind of nearby states, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and a little bit from BC. I think we got into long conversations about how environmental calamity is quote unquote dished up to students and how pessimistic they are now. I mean, they get it. Their general knowledge about the climate emergency has grown exponentially in the past few years. And I think the focus just has to be on the sustainability train is out of the station and it's moving down the tracks. And let's look at that. And we can point to a tremendous amount of things that have happened in Washington State around energy policy, around sustainability infrastructure, around the merging of equity work with sustainability work. On this call, on this Zoom right now, are Sonia Remington Doucette from Bellevue College and Heather Price from North Seattle. I'd love for either of you, Heather or Sonia, to jump in and just talk about the climate justice across the curriculum work that you're up to right now. It's super exciting.
Can you hold on 1 minute? Sarah, do we need to get off the Zoom at 10? I want to acknowledge our time. I'm happy to stay on for another 10 minutes to hear these last comments, but do we have a Zoom issue?
These often do linger for people who want to, so it's very informal. If people, people are adults in charge of their own schedules, and if they need to leave, we will graciously allow them to exit.
Yes.
And then, of course, will be recorded and posted onto the Existential Toolkit website. So for folks who miss whatever happens after they leave, they can go there to check it out too. So as long as you can stay, Krista, this is a very rich conversation with kind of like all of the most exciting people who are doing these different dimensions of this work. And so I'm on the edge of my seat personally. So
thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Jean's friends, please. And then Claude, I still have you on the radar. You'll be next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sonia Doucette, and I'm at Bellevue College near Seattle, Washington. And I can be quick, and Heather, I'll talk, and then if you want to jump in and add stuff. So we're a community college, and Heather's at North Seattle College. I'm at Bellevue College. Both are two-year colleges. And we've had a climate justice across the curriculum program going at our colleges over the last 3 years. And we're hopefully moving into year 4. They're funded by our colleges. We've been doing professional development, basically, faculty professional development, summer institutes, learning communities, workshops. And we've been doing it across the curriculum, arts and humanities, social science, science. And we find that a lot of arts and humanities faculty are involved. They can easily integrate climate justice into the curriculum. So I should also say we're very focused on climate justice. And we just recently received an NSF IUSE grant. We're in our second month of that. It's a 3-year grant to integrate climate justice and civic engagement into STEM courses. So we found that there are barriers for some of our STEM faculty to bringing justice issues into their class. And we haven't had, at least at Bellevue College, I can't speak for North, but we have not had a lot of social science faculty involved, which was surprising to me because it seems like an issue that so easily would integrate well into a social science course. So we've had close to 150 faculty involved by now. We have quarterly book clubs. Yeah, I'll just stop there. And Heather, if you want to add anything.
Thank you.
I think you got it. And I dropped in a link to a web page at my college, but it also points to the work that Sonia started because she began this, kind of taking the work that Jean started with the curriculum for the bioregion, and Sonia started it at Bellevue, and now I'm bringing it into the North Seattle College. And then Sonia's and I have a grant. Sonia's the PI on called See Justice, which is climate justice in undergraduate STEM incorporating civic engagement. And so this is a National Science Foundation IUSE grant that we've just begun about a month ago. And we're meeting with our first cohort next week. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I think the chat is just exploding with richness. I want to go back to the doomism, hopeism thing. So the comment that I had received about the scholar's warning was from a colleague who teaches science, engineering-y kind of things. And I know he's interested in geoengineering. So, it does matter what we're teaching. What kind of solutions are we teaching? And his comment was like, oh, no, don't hang out with those deep adaptation people. DA, those are dark angels. And I was like, this is a weird comment. There's just this range. And I think what Panu said, and I, by the way, put my link to my blog post about Panu, who's a member of this group. Panu says that it's good for there to be a variety of role models, different types of problem-solving strategies versus more emotional strategies and work. It's good that there's a range, but also, what is that like? And is there something more to know about, like what are faculty bringing? And what do they know? Some of my students, I teach English 100, and they just don't know the things that are happening. So I try to just show them like, no, people are doing this. There's this and there's that and there's this. There's this different knowledge translation function that we need to do to show them how people are addressing this. So those are just some of my thoughts on the doomism and hopeism. Is Claude still here? I know you had your hand up. Oh, darn, he must have had to jump off.
I have one more kind of positive little bit of news to add.
Sure.
That's, I think, really important institutionally if it comes about. The Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges in Washington State, we're a big community college state. We have 34 campuses. The leadership of the state board has created a task force to look to develop an initiative that would be a climate solutions, climate justice across the curriculum initiative across all 34 campuses. And we've gotten the governor's office interested and involved. And we think we can go to the legislature as early as January for a supplemental budget. This could be really remarkable. Washington has already funded a climate science literacy initiative across the K-12 system. And they've allocated $4 million a year for that for about 3 years now, and will continue in the next biennium. So the possibilities here, I think, are very, very exciting as to how that might play out over time. But to have people at these leadership levels, vice presidents of academic affairs committed to this is, I think, super hopeful. But we need big institutional commitments like this if we're going to move the needle at all. The grassroots work is terrific and great examples, but the collective just has to start moving.
Thank you so much, Jean. Yeah, I want to be sure to cover.
Yeah, just so there are two people with hands up. Is that what you're going to say? Sorry, Krista.
Yes, I also want to just before, if you're leaving the call, how can, like, what I wanted to really get today is how could this study highlight the role that faculty play in this, especially scaled to 1.5 million faculty in the United States alone. It doesn't take much. Once the faculty is there and they're feeling it, they know some of the things that are happening. Like, these are really smart people, and it doesn't take much for them to, redesign their entire curriculum. But who and how and what type of workshop, those kinds of things. Like, what I'm curious about is how could the next interviews in this project or a write-up of it amplify and accelerate that getting more faculty involved in the kinds of things that each of you have been describing. So with that, I want to go to Heidi, and then whoever else has their hand up, go ahead, unmute yourself after Heidi.
Well, thank you for having me another, well, then I can make another comment. I just want to highlight what Michelle Obama said, that we don't really have a choice but to be optimistic. And I kind of strongly agree with him. You know, I want to die planting the last tree, just kind of, you know, saying, that's what I wanted to say on the hopeism issue. And I really like the question whether doomism is ethical. I doubt that too. And the other question I have, because we were just talking, we need a big institutional shift. But the question is the institutional shift that what is going to have a large impact, or should the knowledge industry outside the university, which is growing exponentially, shouldn't that also be incorporated into your study? Because I believe that the knowledge industry outside the university is going to be the future and is going to reach more people than the university. And so to extend that question, if you're looking especially at faculty, what venues do faculty use outside the academic institutional classes, outside their official academic engagement? What venues do they use outside? Do they have, you know, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, but do they have YouTube channels and stuff like that where they try to reach a larger audience that maybe cannot afford university? So I would really be interested in the knowledge industry outside the university, what kind of role that plays in the entire discourse.
Yeah, thank you for that. In the Worry and Hope study, we found in our student sample, they got more information about the climate crisis outside of their college teachers than inside. And there's such a complex array of information that really the faculty function is making sense of it for themselves and helping their students make sense of it. And, you know, if you think back to that first quote that I shared, which really motivated the study, like, I'm tired of being objective and being neutral about this. I want to get on my soapbox. You know, there's been this idea that the higher ed space is going to be neutral. We're not going to talk about religion. We're not going to talk about, you know, opinions about climate change. And this is shifting that in the faculty role and the identity. And I think some faculty just don't know how to do it. They're like, whoa, that's a touchy subject. I'm just gonna teach my marketing strategies or whatever class it is they teach. You know, hey, I'm just an English teacher here. So how do we help faculty with that complexity? Heather, we're probably getting close to last words. What would you like to contribute?
First, I want to thank Jean and you, Krista, for bringing up the need to have this be more than just grassroots, just us in this room that are already doing this and bringing it to our campuses. And also this, and I think, Jennifer Atkinson, you've brought this up in your podcast around hope versus despair and doomerism, and many of us have been talking about this, and how it's a bit of a false dichotomy in the way that I've been teaching climate. I'm a climate scientist. I've been teaching it since 1999, and how the way that I think about it more now and when I teach it is about helping my students and myself to embrace and hold the uncertainty of this era as we soften our landing into this new climate that we're in. That it's less about, I mean, we do need to stop the emissions, but the changes are already here. We're already living it. We're already the frog in the pot. And then finally, around that grassroots piece, as we institutionalize this, to really keep in mind to pay faculty for their time. And that's something that Sonia, when she started this at Bellevue, was very intentional about, and I've brought it to North. And then when I taught it at a workshop at UW, even the UW faculty were paid. So to pay people for their time. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just kind of following the chat with one eye, and someone just made that comment. We're living in a different world than most of us were educated. I think that's so true, really been present for me. There is no final thought in this matter. We'll continue it an ongoing conversation. Last call, and I'll give it back to Sarah to talk to us about what comes next in the existential toolkit. But Anybody? Jennifer.
Jennifer, go ahead.
I could actually make that announcement. I did drop it in the chat, but we haven't added this yet to the website, but we do have another session coming up on May 28th at 9 a.m. And I'll send an email to all of you soon, but Ellen Kelsey will be returning to us again to unveil the Existential Toolkit website, which will now be live and published, and to sort of take everybody through that, and then to think through as a group where we want to go from here. We're, it's a living site and document, and so we envision more contributions to it, and think about how we can use that and towards our curriculum and towards some of the purposes that we've been talking about just today. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and I would like to ask whether there's energy and desire in this group to think about continuing with after May 28th. We don't have any more of these discussions planned. And so this group, if there still continues to be energy, I mean, what's been amazing about this group is that everybody's coming on their own volition. And like Heather said, no one here is getting paid for this kind of professional development in this particular setting, but I think it's organically kind of grown out of just the interests of the people who are showing up. And Jen and I are loath to the effort it takes to run this as facilitators is very low compared to the positive. And if there's interest in continuing on, I've been keeping my own list of people whose names have come up in these conversations about who we might think about next, or perhaps you could send in a private message to me and Jen if you'd like to continue this, and if so, who you'd like to hear from, and what kind of people should be invited to this space. We're not